Picture this, a sky heavy with storm clouds, the kind that makes the air thick and tense like something big is about to happen. A lone crow cuts through the silence, its sharp cries echoing across a battlefield strewn with broken weapons and forgotten hopes. It's not just any bird, it's a sign, the kind that makes even the most hardened warriors pause, because where that bird flies, something far greater is always watching. That's where she comes in, the Morrigan, a name spoken in whispers, equal parts fear and awe. She's not just another deity with a fancy title, she's the one you hope never notices you, goddess of war, fate, and everything in between. Sometimes she's a beautiful woman offering sweet promises. Other times, she's a shadow at the edge of your vision, impossible to ignore. Either way, she's always a step ahead, already knowing how the story will end, because she's probably the one writing it. Her story isn't like others. It's not neat, it's not simple, and it definitely doesn't have all the answers tied up in a bow. But that's the thing about the Morrigan. She's all about the questions you're too scared to ask. Who controls your fate? What price are you willing to pay for power? And maybe the scariest one of all, when death comes calling, will you be ready to meet her? This is the story of the Morrigan, the goddess of war and fate from Celtic mythology. The Morrigan story begins in the heart of ancient Ireland, where the world was thought to be ruled by gods who controlled everything from the land to the skies. Among these deities were the Tuatha De Danann, a race of divine beings whose power shaped the fate of Ireland. Even among them, the Morrigan stands out from the rest. She wasn't just a goddess, she was a force of nature, a figure deeply entwined with the land, life, and death. Her name, often translated as Great Queen or Phantom Queen, hints at her dual nature. She was seen as both a protector and a destroyer, capable of guiding warriors to glory or laying waste to entire armies. Her roots are ancient, stretching back to a time when the line between gods and mortals was thin, and the stories of these powerful beings were told to explain the unexplainable. The Morrigan's connection to the Tuatha De Danann placed her at the center of Ireland's mythic history. She was a goddess who wasn't confined to one role. Some believed she was a spirit of the land itself, tied to Ireland's sovereignty and its rulers. Others saw her as a war deity, appearing on battlefields to influence the outcomes of great conflicts. And still, others whispered of her as a harbinger of death, whose presence was both a warning and a promise. One of the earliest mentions of the Morrigan comes from tales surrounding the arrival of the Tuatha De Danann in Ireland. They were said to have descended from the skies, bringing with them knowledge, magic, and unmatched power. The Morrigan, with her connection to war and fate, became a crucial figure in their battles against the Fomorians, a race of monstrous beings representing chaos and destruction. It's here that her reputation as a deity of war began to take shape. If you want to know more about these battles, check out my 3-part video series on the creation of Ireland and its first peoples. Link in the description and the top right-hand corner. But the Morrigan wasn't limited to the battlefield. Her origins also tie her to the natural cycles of the world: birth, growth, decay, and renewal. To the ancient Irish, she represented the harsh truths of life and death, of struggle and survival. These themes ran deep in their culture, reflected in the reverence and fear with which they spoke of her. Whether as a protector of the land, a guide for warriors, or a judge of mortal deeds, the Morrigan's origins make her one of the most complex and enduring figures in Irish mythology. Her name still carries weight, echoing through centuries of storytelling, and while we may never know exactly how she was first envisioned, the Morrigan's essence has remained consistent. She is a goddess of power, mystery, and inevitability, a force that shaped the fate of gods and mortals alike. Perhaps the most iconic image of the Morrigan is as a raven or crow, a form she often assumes on the battlefield. To the warriors of ancient Ireland, the sight of a raven circling overhead was more than a natural occurrence. It was an omen. If the Morrigan watched from above, it could mean death was near, whether for the enemy or their own ranks. This bird, with its connection to death and its haunting cries became inseparably tied to her presence. In her human form, the Morrigan's appearance shifts depending on her intent. When she seeks to seduce or influence, she is radiant, her beauty almost otherworldly. Her hair is often described as dark and flowing, her eyes sharp and piercing. But when she seeks to intimidate or instill fear, her visage changes drastically. Her once beautiful face becomes lined and aged, her hair wiry and gray, her movements deliberate and heavy with menace. In this form, she carries the weight of inevitability, the sense that her arrival marks the end of something, whether a life, a battle, or a reign. But her shape-shifting doesn't end there. The Morrigan has also been known to take on forms that are neither human nor bird. She appears as a wolf, stalking the edges of the battlefield, her presence a symbol of relentless hunger and survival. In other tales, she becomes an eel or a cow, using these forms to influence events or deceive those who cross her path. These transformations speak to her connection with the natural world and her ability to manipulate it to her advantage. Even in her divine form, the Morrigan's features often reflect her duality. She is both terrifying and awe-inspiring, embodying the beauty and brutality of life itself. Her form is never static, always shifting to reflect her purpose, her mood, or the message she wishes to convey. To the ancient Irish, the Morrigan's appearance wasn't just about how she looked, it was about what she symbolized. Whether as a raven, a wolf, or a woman, she was a force that could not be ignored, her very presence a reminder of the fragility of life and the inevitability of fate. The Morrigan is a goddess defined by her complexity. She is not easily pinned down, her nature shifting with the needs of the moment, much like her ability to change form. At her core, she represents dualities, life and death, war and peace, destruction and renewal. Her very being embodies the constant push and pull between creation and destruction, a reminder that one cannot exist without the other. Her behavior reflects this fluidity. In one story, she is a fierce protector, aiding her allies with cunning strategy and supernatural might. In another, she is a relentless harbinger of doom, her presence spelling death and despair. The Morrigan's personality is equally multifaceted. On one hand, she is fiercely independent and unapologetically assertive, unafraid to challenge the gods or confront mortal heroes. Her confidence and power can be alluring, even seductive, as she often uses charm and persuasion to influence events. On the other hand, she is also vengeful and unforgiving, especially when spurned or disrespected. Her wrath is legendary, capable of bringing down kings or decimating entire armies. The Morrigan is far more than a goddess of war. Her roles and responsibilities stretch across nearly every aspect of life and death in ancient Irish mythology. She is a guardian, a prophet, a guide, and a judge, her presence touching everything from the rise of kings to the fall of empires. One of her most critical roles is as a protector of sovereignty. In Irish mythology, the land was often personified, and rulers were expected to maintain harmony between their people and the land itself. The Morrigan, as a goddess deeply tied to the land, symbolized the health and well-being of the kingdom. She would appear to those seeking power, often testing their worthiness to rule. If she approved, her favor would bring prosperity and strength. If she did not, her presence foretold ruin and decay. On the battlefield, the Morrigan's responsibilities were equally vital. She was a goddess of war and fate, influencing the outcomes of conflicts through her powers of prophecy, fear, and manipulation. As warriors prepared for battle, they looked for signs of her presence, often in the form of a raven or crow. Her appearance could bring courage to those she supported, or despair to those she opposed. In many tales, she doesn't physically fight, but instead uses her influence to ensure that destiny unfolds as it should. Her role as a prophet is one of her most defining traits. The Morrigan is a goddess of foresight, her visions often predicting doom or victory with unsettling accuracy. These prophecies, though often cryptic, carry an unshakable certainty. Her words are not suggestions, but declarations of what is to come. This role connects her deeply to the concept of fate, as she not only sees the threads of destiny, but actively ensures they are followed. In addition to her ties to war and authority, the Morrigan serves as a guardian of the dead, a psychopomp, guiding souls from the mortal world to the otherworld. Her presence at the site of death, whether on a battlefield or in quieter moments of passing, underscores her connection to endings and transitions. To the ancient Irish, death wasn't just an end, it was a transformation, and the Morrigan's role was to oversee and facilitate this change. But her responsibilities weren't limited to destruction and endings. The Morrigan is also tied to renewal and balance. Just as she brings death to one cycle, she ensures the beginnings of another. Her nature is one of contradictions. She is nurturing in one moment, terrifying in the next. She is both an ally and an adversary, a force of chaos that ultimately serves a greater order. This duality makes her a profoundly human figure, reflecting the complexities of life itself. To the ancient Irish, the Morrigan wasn't just a goddess. They saw in her the raw, untamed forces that shaped the world, forces that could destroy or uplift, depending on how they were approached. The Morrigan's familial connections are as mysterious and layered as the goddess herself. While Irish mythology doesn't provide a definitive family tree, in some accounts, the Morrigan is said to be one of the daughters of Ernmas. Ernmas is often described as the goddess of sovereignty and fertility, and her children reflect these traits in their various roles. Alongside the Morrigan, Ernmas is also credited with mothering other significant deities, including Macha, Baive, and Naimon, figures who are sometimes interpreted as aspects of the Morrigan herself, which we'll touch on later. One of the most notable relationships in the Morrigan's mythology is her connection to the Dagda, the good god of the Tuatha De Danann. In one story, their union takes place during the festival of Samhain, the time when the veil between worlds is thinnest. The Morrigan and the Dagda meet by a river, a place symbolizing boundaries and transitions, and their coupling is said to bring prosperity and victory to the Tuatha De Danann. While the Morrigan's connection to the Dagda is often highlighted, her relationships are rarely depicted in romantic or domestic terms. Unlike many other deities in Celtic mythology, she isn't defined by her roles as a wife or mother. Instead, her partnerships, whether with gods, mortals, or even the land itself, serve a larger purpose, aligning with her roles as a force of fate and war. The question of whether the Morrigan has children is less clear. Some interpretations suggest that her offspring, if any, would be symbolic rather than literal, representing the forces she embodies. For example, the land she protects and the warriors she guides could be seen as her children, extensions of her influence in the mortal realm. In this way, her legacy is less about lineage and more about the impact she leaves on the world around her. Her family ties, like much of her mythology, are open to interpretation. What remains constant is her independence and self-determination. Whether as a daughter of Ernmas, a partner to the Dagda, or a sister to Macha, Baive, and Naimon, the Morrigan's relationships serve to enhance her power rather than define it. She is a goddess who stands apart, her connections adding depth to her character without diminishing her autonomy. Hey everyone, just a quick intermission here. I wanted to say thank you for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Did you know that over 80% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel? If you've enjoyed this content so far, it would be incredible if you could hit that subscribe button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel grow and ensures that you won't miss any more of our fascinating stories we explore together. Also, if you're feeling generous, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and share with anyone else who may enjoy it. Your support really does make a difference and keeps the content coming. Thanks again, and let's get back to the story. The Morrigan's abilities make her one of the most feared and respected figures in Irish mythology. From commanding the natural world to manipulating the minds of men, the Morrigan wields her powers with precision and purpose, always ensuring that fate unfolds as it should. One of her most renowned abilities is shapeshifting. The Morrigan can assume many forms, from animals to humans, each chosen to suit her needs. Her transformations aren't just for concealment, they often carry symbolic weight. As a raven or crow, she surveys the battlefield, embodying death and prophecy. As a wolf, she represents predatory cunning and the raw instincts of survival. This power makes her both elusive and omnipresent. She can be anywhere and anyone. As we touched on before, her prophetic abilities are equally legendary. The Morrigan is a goddess of foresight, capable of seeing the future with chilling clarity. Her prophecies often center on death and destruction, delivered in cryptic and poetic language that leaves little room for interpretation. In one famous tale, she delivers a prophecy foretelling the outcome of the Second Battle of Moytura, ensuring the Tuatha De Danaan's victory over the Fomorians. The Morrigan also wields the power of fear and confusion, which she uses to devastating effect on the battlefield. Her mere presence can unnerve even the bravest warriors, and she is known to incite chaos among enemy ranks. In some accounts, she takes the form of a crow, flying over the battlefield and letting out cries that cause panic and disarray. Her ability to manipulate emotions and perceptions gives her an edge in battle, turning the tide of conflicts without the need for direct combat. Her connection to the natural world is another source of her strength. The Morrigan can influence the land, the weather, and the animals that inhabit it. She has been credited with summoning storms to disrupt enemies or bring destruction to those who displease her. Her role as a goddess of the land means that she can also bring fertility and abundance when she chooses, though these blessings are often reserved for those who have earned her favor. Despite the destructive nature of many of her powers, the Morrigan's abilities also include protection and support for those she deems worthy. In her alliance with the Tuatha De Danann, she uses her strength and foresight to guide them to victory. Her powers are not wielded indiscriminately. They are tools she uses to fulfill her roles as a goddess of fate and balance. Ultimately, the Morrigan's powers reflect her multifaceted nature. She is not merely a war goddess or a prophet. She is a force of nature, capable of influencing life, death, and everything in between. For all her power, the Morrigan is not without limitations. Her weaknesses are not physical vulnerabilities, but rather tied to the principles she embodies and the rules of fate she enforces. These constraints highlight the delicate balance she represents and remind us that even the most fearsome deities are not entirely unbound. One of her primary weaknesses lies in her deep connection to fate. While the Morrigan is a goddess of prophecy, capable of foretelling and influencing the future, she is also bound by it. She does not create fate. She ensures it is fulfilled. This means that even the Morrigan cannot alter destiny without consequence. Her role as an enforcer of fate ties her hands in ways that might frustrate her, particularly if a desired outcome conflicts with the natural order. She is both an agent of fate and a prisoner of it. Another limitation is her reliance on mortals and other gods to execute her will. This dependence on others can create vulnerabilities, especially when those she aligns with fail to live up to her expectations or act against her will. For example, in her interactions with the hero Cuchulainn, her attempts to sway him are met with resistance, ultimately leading to a strained dynamic that limits her influence. Finally, her emotional nature can sometimes be a double-edged sword. The Morrigan is known for her passion and intensity, whether in love, war, or vengeance. While this fuels her strength, it can also cloud her judgment. In some stories, her wrath leads to unnecessary destruction or alienates those who might otherwise have been allies. These weaknesses do not diminish the Morrigan's power, but rather emphasize her complexity, showing that even a goddess must operate within certain boundaries. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Morrigan is her existence as both a singular goddess and a collective force. The Morrigan Triad is often interpreted as a grouping of three closely related goddesses, Macha, Baive, and Naaman. In some interpretations, Macha, Baive, and Naaman are seen as separate sisters, while in others, they are simply different aspects of the same deity, representing facets of her power and purpose. Whatever the case, these three figures work together as a unified force. In this sense, the Morrigan is not just one being, but a convergence of three powerful entities, each essential to her legend. Bive is the goddess most associated with prophecy and the chaos of war. Her name means crow or battle crow, and she often appears on battlefields, flying overhead as a dark omen of death. Bive's role in the triad focuses on foresight and the psychological aspects of conflict. Her cries incite terror and confusion among enemies, often driving them to panic before the battle has even begun. She is the voice of prophecy, delivering cryptic warnings and ensuring that fate unfolds as it should. Bive's presence is a harbinger of death, and she is often seen circling above battlefields, watching the carnage unfold. Her connection to the dead ties her to the other world, where she acts as a guide for fallen souls. While her methods are often unsettling, she plays a crucial role in maintaining the balance of life and death, reminding warriors of the inevitability of their fate. Maka is a goddess of sovereignty and endurance, embodying the Morrigan's connection to the land and its rulers. Her name is closely linked to the concept of kingship, and she often appears to test or challenge those seeking to rule. Maka is a fierce protector of the natural order, ensuring that only those worthy of leadership can hold power. In some tales, Maka is depicted as a warrior goddess, leading armies into battle and defending the land with unmatched ferocity. In others, she takes on a more nurturing role, representing the fertility and prosperity of the land itself. This duality reflects her importance as both a giver and taker of life, embodying the cycles of growth and decay that govern the natural world. Naaman's name translates to frenzy or panic, and she is the aspect of the Morrigan most closely associated with the raw chaos of battle. Unlike Bive, who uses fear strategically, Naaman embodies unbridled rage and confusion. Her presence on the battlefield causes warriors to turn on one another, breaking their ranks and leading to complete disarray. Naaman's influence extends beyond the physical realm. She can manipulate emotions and perceptions, driving her enemies to madness. In some accounts, her shrieks are so piercing and unearthly that they cause warriors' hearts to burst from sheer terror. Naaman is a force of pure chaos, ensuring that no battle unfolds as planned and that no army escapes unscathed. As you can see, each sister embodies a different aspect of the Morrigan. Together, these three goddesses form the Morrigan Triad, a collective that represents the full spectrum of war, fate, and sovereignty. Bive brings foresight, Maka ensures justice and leadership, and Naaman unleashes the uncontrollable fury of conflict. While they can act independently, they are most powerful when working together, blending strategy, strength, and chaos to achieve their goals. The Morrigan's presence looms large across the myths of Ireland, where her actions and influence shape the outcomes of battles, the fate of kings, and the balance of the natural world. Here are some of her most notable feats and moments from Celtic mythology. One of the Morrigan's most famous roles occurs during the Second Battle of Moytura, where the Tuatha De Danann fought the Fomorians, a race of monstrous beings who sought to enslave Ireland. The Morrigan plays a pivotal part in this myth, using her powers to inspire and guide her people to victory. Before the battle, the Morrigan has an important encounter with the Dagda, the good god of the Tuatha De Danann. The two meet at a river on the eve of Samhain, and their union is said to symbolize the merging of war and fertility, destruction and renewal. This act strengthens the Tuatha De Danann and solidifies the Morrigan's role as a protector of the land and its sovereignty. During the battle itself, the Morrigan uses her abilities to strike fear into the hearts of the Fomorians. Taking the form of a crow, she flies above the battlefield, spreading confusion and panic among the enemy ranks. She also delivers a prophecy of the Tuatha De Danann's victory, bolstering their morale. After the Fomorians are defeated, the Morrigan proclaims the triumph in a hauntingly poetic declaration. The Morrigan's interactions with the hero Cuchulainn showcase her complexity as both an ally and an adversary. In this tale, she approaches Cuchulainn in her human form, offering him her love and support. However, the hero, unaware of her divine nature, arrogantly rejects her, dismissing her as a mere mortal. Angered by his dismissal, the Morrigan decides to challenge him. During a critical battle, she shapeshifts into various forms: a heifer, an eel, and a wolf, each designed to distract or harm him. Despite her efforts, Cuchulainn manages to overcome each of her attacks. Later, when she appears injured and in disguise, he unwittingly heals her, thus resolving their conflict. In one story, she appears to the warriors of Ulster, delivering a cryptic prophecy of their impending doom. Her words, though often veiled in metaphor, are unshakable and inescapable. This power makes her both revered and feared, as those who hear her prophecies know that she speaks only of inevitabilities. Her role as a prophet is particularly evident after Cuchulainn's death. She appears to mark the moment, lamenting his passing in the form of a crow. Her presence solidifies her connection to fate and reinforces the idea that even the mightiest heroes cannot escape their destiny. In another tale, the Morrigan, or an aspect of her Macha, places a curse on the men of Ulster. This curse arises after a grievous insult, where Macha, heavily pregnant, is forced to race against the king's horses. Despite her condition, she wins the race, but the strain causes her to give birth prematurely. In her fury, she curses the men of Ulster to experience the pain of childbirth whenever their land is under threat. This curse leaves the warriors incapacitated during one of their kingdom's greatest conflicts, demonstrating the Morrigan's power to exact vengeance on a grand scale. Through these feats, the Morrigan solidifies her place as one of the most powerful and multifaceted figures in Irish mythology. She is not merely a goddess of war, but a force that shapes the very fabric of fate, sovereignty, and the natural order. Her actions ripple through time, leaving a permanent mark on the myths of Ireland and the imaginations of all who hear her tales. So here we are at the end of it all. The battlefield's gone quiet, the echoes of her presence fading into the distance, but her shadow lingers. The Morrigan isn't the kind of figure you forget. She's the whisper in the back of your mind, the weight of inevitability that comes with every choice, every turning point. She's not just about war or death. She's about what comes after, the stories left behind, and the truths we'd rather not face. Maybe that's why she endures. Not because she's simple or easy to understand, but because she isn't. She's power and chaos, prophecy and justice, all wrapped into something we can't quite grasp. And maybe we're not supposed to. The Morrigan isn't here to make us comfortable. She's here to remind us that life is messy, unpredictable, and fleeting. That every rise has a fall, every king has a reckoning, and every beginning has an end. But for all her darkness, there's something strangely reassuring about her. She's the constant, the one who watches when the dust settles and the world turns again. Because no matter how much we fight it, the cycle goes on. And somewhere in that cycle, she's still there, waiting, watching, and reminding us that nothing ever truly ends. It just changes.